Welcome to parts 2 of our Puppy Plush mini series in Beyond Basics Crochet. And today we are going to focus on the body. Now, as mentioned at the end of the last episode, we are not going to focus on the tail or the legs. We're just going to focus on the basics of the body and basically what you're going to do as you crochet it and how to basically close it up after you stuff it. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So for part 2, we are going to start on the body. And so what we're going to do next is actually do 2 rows of the 25 stitches. Instead of continuously decreasing, we're just going to start with the body and actually make the body connected to the head, so that way we don't have to sew that later. Alright, so we're just going to do 2 rows of the 25. And it may be a little bit difficult to actually do these rows at first because the stuffing can make it slightly harder because it does stretch out the stitches a little bit. But you kind of get used to it after a while. And with time and practice, you'll just learn methods and different ways of doing it. When it comes down to it, when you crochet, and especially when you're making stuffed animals or any sort of design, you kind of just learn what works best for you. My methods aren't always necessarily the best method of doing this, but you're free to kind of explore other methods and learn what works best for you. Alright, so just gonna mark that row. So we're just gonna do 1 more of the 25. And basically this is going to be the kind of sort of the neck. These rows of 25 are going to be the kind of the neck for the plush. Because normally what you might do is have make the head and body completely separate and then sew them together later. But I know for beginners especially, that actually can be kind of difficult to sew the head and body together without it looking weird. So I found that this is probably the best way for those of you who are not used to making stuffed animals yet. This might be the best way to make it look more natural and have a better looking transition between the body and the neck and the head. Okay, so for the next 2 rows we're going to increase. So we're actually going to have increase to 30 stitches and then increase to 35 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. All right, and now we're going to increase to 35. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. And the reason we increased to 35 stitches is because you do want the body to be slightly wider than the head, and you're also going to want it to be longer. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to do 10 rows of the 35. Okay, and then we have 10 rows. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And normally what I would do when making any sort of stuffed animal is that I would do then 7 rows decreasing and then stuffing kind of like as I decrease and then close it up. But which is very similar to what I did with the sample here. It's difficult to see because probably the legs, but I decreased until I closed them. But so what I'm going to do instead is actually make the bottom a separate piece and sew it together, and this is actually probably easier for beginners to do. All right. So we're going to fasten it off. And what I'm going to do is what's called an invisible close. So I normally use this type of tapestry needle, but you can also use one of these plastic needles as well. It just depends on preference. I prefer using a tapestry needle, especially when using smaller yarn. I only really use these plastic needles for huge yarn, for thicker yarn. And so with a invisible clothes, it's supposed to make it look a little bit more natural. So it's harder to tell where the clothes actually was. So you kind of just put in that first row, and at the top of your last stitch, do that. And then you're going to come like over here, just below that next stitch, and then bring it out like that. I know that's probably difficult to see, but then it makes it look a little bit more natural and even. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and poke it through right here and weave it in to the inside. And it doesn't have to be like well in, just do it for like 3 or 4 stitches. Just weave it in and pull it. That way it's secure. And that's what that looks like. And so now we're going to stuff it real quick. And basically what we did with the head, just fluff it out, separate the dense clumps, and then just start stuffing it. And just make sure the stuffing is nice and even as you're putting it in there to give it good shape. Don't want it to be lumpy. Right? Looks a little bit like a pinball. Or ball pin. Alright. So now that we got it stuffed, we're going to make the bottom. And we're going to do that by basically making a circle with 7 rows that increase out to 35. Okay, and there we have the circle that's going to be the bottom of the plush. So what I'm going to do, I'm not actually going to fasten this off. When I do this, when I cut the yarn, what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to make a really, really long tail. And this is what I'm going to use to attach the bottom to the body. You kind of just want to make sure it's long enough that when you sew it on there, there's enough to sew, but even if there's not, that's okay too. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly just not give that a little, make a little knot with that. And then I'm going to get my needle and I'm going to attach the bottom. And I usually like to attach where both of the endings of the rows were. So just kind of gotta find them real quick. And then you just kind of attach it. And the reason I'm doing it this way, where you actually attach the bottom, is so that way if you make a mistake where you don't have enough stuffing or you have too much, it'll be easier for you to have to just open up the bottom versus undoing the stitching and then redoing it. This way it's just easier to access the bottom of the plush, so that way you can access the stuffing. And you can either sew through both loops when you're sewing these together, or you can just sew through the outer ones. It's kind of your choice, whichever one you think will look aesthetically pleasing. So that's what it looks like when the bottom is sewed onto it. And it does kind of give it like a flatter bottom, but that's alright because it'll look better as we put the legs on it later in later videos. And so there is still a lot of yarn left over from the tail. That's also okay. Just basically cut as much as you need. And this excess right here, we can just use later when sewing on the features. Now you can quickly just like tie like a small, easy to undo knot here if you just don't want your project to come undone. But don't weave this in yet. I recommend not weaving in your ends until the end of the project, only because if you make a mistake and you weave your ends in, it will make it a lot more difficult to undo them, and it might actually mess up the project. It might mess up the stitching. It might mess up whatever you had sewn. So we are at the end for this one. And so that's both the body and the head. And so for part 3, we are going to move on to the features. And I will see you in the next episode, and we'll head out to the outro for this one. I appreciate you guys showing up for part 2 of today's mini-series. And in the next one, what we're going to do is we're going to actually start focusing on the features. So we're going to focus on the features of the head as well as the legs to kind of just finish up with our plush. And feel free to check out the other videos that CCPL offers on our Facebook. Check out our YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. And I can't wait to see you in part 3. Bye-bye!